Hi there, Juleka here. Before we get started, I want to invite you, yes, you, to be a guest on the show. If you're an adult and a child of immigrants, and they could be from anywhere in the world, really, I'd love to talk to you about the conversations that are necessary but challenging, especially right about now. So whatever you're all getting into, I want to know about it. Politics, money, holidays, marriage, kids, everything. So send me an email directly at juleka@lantiguawilliams.com and we'll get you on the show. I can't wait to hear from you. Hi, everybody. Today we welcome Katherine. Katherine's Ecuadorian parents raised her to be very independent. But now that she's an adult, they'd love it if she turned to them for support more than she typically does. For Katherine, accepting their help involves a lot of careful calculations. Let's get into it.
My name is Katherine, and growing up, I called my parents Mamí and Papí. In fact, they actually preferred it. Anything else, mother, father, ma or pa, they deemed disrespectful. So growing up in my family, I feel like was a very quintessential immigrant experience. We were all getting a hang of the language, but because I was younger, it was easier for me to absorb it and learn faster. They spent their days working and then they'd come home. So I didn't have a sibling at the time. So I spent a lot of my time with my cousins or alone. They were very much on top of, you make your own money. Education is important. You don't get married because you needed to. You get married because you want to. They were very big on you are your own person. We're raising you, so you don't need someone else. So it's really interesting to see how they, as I get older, have pushed for me to lean more on them and be more dependent on them. And so I wonder if that has something to do with the fact that I had to figure things out for myself growing up. At some point, they were like, well, you can lean on us for more. But then at that point, we had transitioned into adulthood. So it's kind of like, no, not necessarily. I can pretty much handle myself now. They take it really personally. I think the way that they grew up, it's very community driven. And I definitely understand other ways that they kind of encourage me to lean on them more is whenever I talk about, an issue that I'm having, or maybe for a certain month, my budget is super tight for whatever reason, they will be like, come home and let us know if you need beans or a jug of milk or whatever it is. Having a tight budget is kind of alarms for them. They're like, oh my God, she's run out of money. Things are going bad. Come stay with us for a couple days. They really spiral into it. And I'm like, no, it's okay. I'm not starving. And I would never say no if I were really in a tight and difficult situation, but I'm not in that situation. Unfortunately, I think there's always a string attached. And in that case, it would be oh, because you're coming to stay with us, and you're leaning on us in that situation, we get to dictate the food, right? We get to dictate the food that we're helping you out with. They would never force me to eat something that I'm not comfortable with, but they would that would be the unspoken conditional, aspect of that help. Side story, I lost my home in Hurricane Ida, so everything got flooded, and it was pretty crazy. That's a dire situation, right, in which I had to lean on them. But before I did that, I laid down some very hardcore boundaries. And so there's a hesitancy in accepting these things because you have to really manage it like a politician would with a policy. Be explicit about your expectations, about the timeline, the details, your boundaries, and constantly reinforce and remind them. It's still hard to, accept help. there's a price tag attached to it. And it shouldn't be like that. It should be like, my help is unconditional, right? I don't expect anything later down the road. And they say they don't, which is the most hilarious part. They're like, I don't expect anything because you're my child and I love you, but there's always something there. And when you point it out to them, they're like, no, you're misinterpreting this. And then they kind of start to gaslight you. I have a younger sister. She's 8 years younger. And the way that they've raised her and are still raising her, because she's just entering adulthood, she just started her first year at university, has been different. And I think she's able to be a lot more aggressive about her boundaries, and they'll take her seriously. That's the key difference. They don't need to have constant arguments and bickering. They'll just take her word for it. They'll have an adult discussion with her. They'll sit down and then have that conversation, and they're open to listening. And it's so different from how I was raised, because I was raised, it was like my way or the highway. At first, I was like, this is weird. I didn't grow up with this. This sucks to see this, like, that you were capable of behaving like this as a parent, but you just weren't capable of doing that with me at that time.
What's up, everybody? I'm Stevon Lewis, a licensed psychotherapist. In my private practice, I specialize in working with individuals who have reached levels of excellence that sometimes come with great personal and professional challenges. We talk through and strategize about the pressures of being entrepreneurs, the rigors of leading creative people, the struggle to stay motivated, the cost of fitting in, and so much more. I'm now preparing to host a new podcast from LWC Studios, where I'll offer feedback to listeners like you about professional and aspirational challenges from others and from within ourselves. Things like imposter syndrome, perfectionism, toxic positivity, the dark side of humility, and especially how we define success. I'd love to hear about your successes and challenges, your sacrifices, the ways you've celebrated, and what's ahead as you grow. Send our producer, Virginia, an email so she can get your story on the show. She's at virginia@lwcstudios.com. Talk to you soon.
As the eldest daughter in an immigrant family, I completely relate to what Katherine said. I also was raised to be very independent, very self-reliant. And I also learned the value of having healthy boundaries with my family. So those two things make communicating needs really, really difficult for folks like Katherine and I. Maybe you do. How can first gens manage our relationships with our parents in a way that helps them feel needed and wanted without feeling like we're betraying who we are at our core? To help us figure it out, you know what I did? I called in an expert.
My name is Evelyn Mejia. I'm a marriage family therapist. I'm also a first-generation immigrant myself. I was born in Guatemala, but I came to the U.S. when I was 9. So I was raised in California.
I always start with the same question, which is, what did you hear as you listened to Katherine's story?
What did I hear as I listened to her story? A struggle of identity, right? Of, wanting to be like your own person, but also being very tied, to the family, right? Experiencing feelings of guilt, maybe of wanting to break away from some of that, of creating kind of your own route or journey, right? I think it's a very shared experience when it comes to, first gen, daughter of immigrants.
So Katherine was really clear that her parents, pushed for education, pushed her to be Americanized. Like, they encouraged her to really take full advantage of all of the opportunities that they came to the U.S. for, while at the same time, she felt like they wanted her to need them. Do you see that in your practice? How does it manifest, this need to be needed?
It's something very common that happens in terms of, aging parents, right? I think in immigrant parents too. I think that there's a lot of identity tied to their work, right? And to their ability to provide for their families. And so for our parents, as they're aging and their identities are also changing, right? There's parts of them that they're losing too, right? It manifests itself in that way. Like I want to feel needed. I want to feel wanted. I want to feel like I can still do these things for you, which can create a conflict, right? Because, well, I'm already an adult and I can do these things for myself. But I think building compassion for our aging parents can go a long way to understand kind of their experience and where they're coming from. With Katherine, I think it sounds like her parents are wanting to still feel that sense of purpose, right? Of that sense of needing and being useful and being able to do some things for her.
There's a word that I've heard multiple times when I interview first gens about trying to set boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And it's ungrateful, malagradecida, right? Like it comes out of very loving parents who are otherwise very supportive, but who feel like their child is not grateful for what they have been able to do, and that they're demonstrating it by trying to separate, by trying to gain that independence.
Mm-hmm.
How can we keep from getting to the point where somebody calls us malagradecida, you ungrateful child?
One of the things that I was thinking about when listening to Katherine, I think is, how do we show love, right? And it's sometimes there's a difference between how we show love and how others want to be shown love, or how they receive love, right? And so understanding, how do your parents show love? We might not be speaking the same love language, right? In terms of how we're letting them, or maybe expressing gratitude, or letting them know that the sacrifices that they made for us are something that we carry with us and that we are grateful for. Maybe the way that they want to receive love is the same way that they showed it to you. Whether it was buying things, right? A lot of our parents, they show love by buying us stuff. Sometimes it's stuff that we may not need or want, right? But maybe doing the same for them, right? When you're visiting, right? Like bringing them something to kind of, in that way, speak the same love language that they do.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was like, so do I bring the quiz? Like the love language quiz, and do we fill out the questionnaire? Like, I don't know how I would do this with my mom, but I definitely know how she expresses love. And she's definitely one of the people who will just buy you stuff that you're like, but I have that already, or I don't need that. And so, so maybe mirroring back to them, their love language is a way to go. Okay, so two more questions for you. One is about the need sometimes for there to be healthy conflict, because sometimes you just get to that point where there's an impasse and there's no way out but through it. Talk to us about not avoiding the conflict, but sort of entering into it in a way that can get you out of it in a healthy and sort of like forward moving way.
I think communication, right, is a big one, and talking about it as it comes up. And expressing, right, our needs, our wants. And I know that I statements can feel very foreign to us, right? Like, when we use, and what I mean by an I statement is like, I feel blank when you blank, right? It can feel like a very foreign language because we're not used to solving or having conflict in that way, but learning, to practice kind of that language so that it's more receptive, right? Because when we're coming at it from like, you did this, you did that, or you do this, or you always do that, it can feel very combative, right? And it can put the other person in a state of defensiveness, right? Like having to defend themselves. And so getting into the practice of like, I feel mad, or I feel like unheard when you ignore my request. Like getting into that practice of like, what is it that I need to communicate? How can I communicate it more effectively so that we can have healthy conflict, right?
My final question to you is, any other advice that you might have for Katherines and the Katherines of the world and other first gens who are navigating the push and pull of wanting to be close to our families, wanting to be independent, and not alienating either side?
I think building compassion for our aging parents. And I think once you start to build that compassion, you can gain understanding, and at the same time build kind of like a separation, right? Like in being able to view it as something outside of yourself, that you don't always have to take responsibility for it. You can understand it, you can be compassionate for it, and you can be, gentle with it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to take on the responsibility for somebody else's feelings. Again, building kind of this balance between who you are as a person and who you're becoming versus who someone else is, what they're struggling with or what they may be going through.
Evelyn, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, let's see what we learned from Evelyn today. Speak their love language. Try showing your love for your parents in ways that make it easy for them to receive it. If it's not always what comes most naturally to you, think of it as an experiment. Use I statements. Doing so lets you communicate your feelings and your needs, while also helping you avoid defensive reactions from your loved ones. And remember, don't hold yourself responsible. You can be compassionate and understanding towards your parents without taking responsibility for their feelings. Thank you for listening and for sharing us. How to Talk to Mamí and Papí About Anything is an original production of LWC Studios. Virginia Lora is the show's producer. Kojin Tashiro is our mixer. Manuela Bedoya is our marketing lead. I'm the creator, Juleika Lantigua. On Twitter and Instagram, we're at Talk to Mamí Papí. Bye, everybody. Same place next week.